It's a beautiful day here in New Brunswick, Canada. The sun is shining, it's warm, beautiful day. Wait a minute now. Unless you're watching this in January or February, and then I can pretty much guarantee you that we're probably freezing and there's lots of snow. But no matter what, it's a beautiful day today, so let's enjoy it. What better way to enjoy such a beautiful day than to talk about water bath canning? The gardens are blooming, the vegetables are coming in, so it's time to start preserving all the beautiful things that we've grown over the summer. So what is canning? Canning is a process of preserving foods by heating them in jars and to save temperatures to be able to keep them over an extended period of time. So we heat our jars to certain temperatures to kill any harmful microorganisms that could be left over inside of our bottles. So it's a safe way to preserve foods. If not properly preserved, foods can develop mold, yeast, and some pretty harmful bacteria. So when we talk about bacteria, the one that we're most preoccupied with, because it can have some very serious health effects, is the bacteria Clostridium botulinum. This bacteria thrives in environments where there is moisture and lack of oxygen. So when we're preserving our foods, this is exactly the environment that we create. Water bath canning brings the temperature of your food in jars to 212 degrees. And this is the temperature that we need to attain to be able to destroy any kind of harmful microorganisms or bacteria that would be inside of the bottles. Another thing that I cannot stress enough is the importance to follow the recipes that have been tested. Now, following the recipes doesn't mean that as long as you follow certain steps or certain canning procedures that you're good. These recipes have been tested with their preserving agents, with the acidity of the food, on how safe they are. Everybody likes to take their favorite salsa recipe and put it in a bottle and preserve it. And this can be very dangerous. You really need to follow the recipe as stated in the books. Even when you're making jams and jellies, the high acid food, we think, well, those are safer, the pickles, there's vinegar. The sugar in jams and jellies will act as a preservation agent, and if you cut them down thinking, well, I want to reduce my intake of sugar, so I think I'll just cut the sugar in half, but those can be unsafe practices. There are two more well-known methods of preserving foods. One of them is water bath canning, what I'm going to be talking about today, and the other one is pressure canning. But today I'm going to focus more on the water bath canning method. If you are interested, however, in the pressure canning, be sure to check out my vlog on the pressure canning and the basics of pressure canning. Water bath canning is the method that's used when you want to preserve your high acid foods. These are foods that have a pH of over 4.6. So we have our fruits, jams and jellies, your pickles, different kinds of things if you enjoy making them, like chutneys, and I've made plum sauces that are great, chili sauces, salsa. So all these, your tomatoes, all these are considered high acid foods and are safe to use in the water bath method canning. And the acidity in these foods can also be increased by adding certain things to them, like vinegar or citric acid or lemon juice, or even your sugar in your jams and jellies will act as preservation agents. Pressure canning, this method is better used for your vegetables, your meats, seafood, so that's the pressure canning method for those types of foods. Some new and exciting things developing in water bath canning is there's now a new approved method of canning your high acid foods. So it's called atmospheric steam canning, and it's been approved and tested by the University of Wisconsin in collaboration with the National Center for Home Food Preservation. So this is now a new and accepted method to preserve high acid foods. As long as you follow the recipes that have been approved for this method, it's another great way to preserve your foods for longer periods of time. When you get into canning and you start talking about food preservation and water bath canning and pressure canning, and you're going to hear all kinds of interesting stories. I think the one that you end up hearing the most often is, well, I've been doing that my entire life and we've never gotten sick, and so this is probably true, and in my head, or sometimes I'll say it depending on who it is, I'll say, well, you haven't gotten sick yet. One thing that you may hear me refer to once in a while is, when you know better, you do better. 40, 50 years ago, our parents had us in the back seat of the car with no seat belts on, not strapped in whatsoever, probably smoking in the front seat with the windows rolled up, and it was acceptable back then. Well, we don't do that anymore. We don't leave our kids roaming around in the back seat, not buckled in with their seat belts, and we hopefully do not smoke in the car as well with children. So just keep in mind, when you know better, you do better. And when you're talking about food safety, the last thing you want is for somebody to be sick because of something that you fed them. An important thing to know when you're processing using water bath canning or pressure canning is to know the altitude that you live at. So if you live at a higher altitude, your water will boil at a lower temperature. So we know we need to get to 212 degrees, but if your altitude is higher, that means your water is boiling at a lower temperature. So what usually happens in cases in higher altitudes is you need to increase your processing time. You need to increase the time that your product is boiling, either in your water bath canner or your pressure canner. So it's important to know at what altitude you live at. I know here that I'm at sea level, so I can safely follow all the recipes in the books, because usually they base their recommendations at altitudes of sea level. If you're not sure, there's different places where you can check that information out. I'm sure you're able to find that somewhere online. You can also check with your municipalities in Canada. If you live in the US, at your local county extension agent. They will be able to give you that information on what altitude you live at. And it's really important to adjust. There's also some good resources out there. These are resources that was given to me. I had taken a class actually in food preservation with 3 master food preservers. Although I am not a master food preserver, I am not an expert for sure, but it was a very complete class, 30 to 40 hour class on food preservation, and we were given resources at that class, and these resources do have the different temperature adjustments for altitude, and pressure canning has the pounds per pressure that you need to can at different altitudes. So referring to resources, these are some that were recommended resources when I did take the food preservation class. And the reason why they recommended these resources, the recipes in these books are all scientifically tested for safety. The recipes have been tested for temperature, safety, how they do under canning, long-term preservation. So the first one that I have here is called So Easy to Preserve. And it says it's a cooperative extension, the University of Georgia. So this is one of the resources, and this one has the comprehensive guide or charts on like the altitude and pressure adjustments. This is one that was given as well. So it's the Bernardin Complete Book of Home Preserving. So this one as well has all the information on altitude and adjustments and processing times. So this is a very good resource as well. And the third one that I have is the Batch. And this one has some really interesting recipes as well. So it takes like one fruit or vegetable and tells you all different ways or all different things you can do with it. Like they'll talk about like the tomato and what you can do if you dehydrate it, if you can it, so it's really it has some interesting recipes, and so this was another recommended resource. So other resources as well, you can go online. There would be Health Canada, so that is another trusted resource. And there's the National Center for Home Food Preservation, which as well is a very good online site. It has a whole canning 101 step-by-step guide as well, recipes and resources, so it's a very good online resource as well. There's a lot of information out there on food preservation, on canning, but not all of it is very good, so make sure that you follow all these tested and reliable resources. One thing when it comes to canning is that there are just certain foods that you cannot put in a jar and safely can, whether you're doing water bath canning or whether you're doing the pressure canning method. These foods would be flour, any kind of thickening agent. You can't put those in bottles, you can't can that. No rice or barley, pasta, noodles, cream, milk. Those are some of the foods that are not safe to put inside any kind of canning method. Another one that surprises a lot of people when we talk about this, or disappoints maybe a lot of people, is lobster. Now, I'm not talking about any kind of seafood. I'm just talking specifically about lobster. First of all, you would never water bath seafood. You would always pressure can seafood because it's a low acid food. But a lot of people surprisingly do put lobster in bottles and process with either method, but there is no safe way to safely preserve lobster even if you're pressure canning. So lobster, first of all, from talking from a lot of experience being married to a lobster harvester, the best way to preserve lobster is to take your regular mason jar, fill it to the rim with lobster, put a salt solution in there up to the top of the lobster, and freeze it. When you thaw that lobster out, it will taste pretty close to fresh. So that is the only way to safely preserve lobster over an extended period of time, and I do apologize if I have sadly disappointed you if you eat it any other way. When choosing foods to can, whether pressure canning or water bath canning, it's really important that you look for good quality foods. It's not a good idea to take some foods that are starting to spoil, starting to go bad, that are kind of starting to be a little wrinkly, and to say, well, just to preserve them, I'm going to put them in a bottle and process them. The higher quality that the food is when you can it, the higher the quality of the food will be when you eat it. So you want to make sure that you have good quality food when from the start. There are two methods as well when you're going to be looking at recipes that you may wonder, well, what does that really mean? So there's raw pack and there's also hot pack. So when they're referring to raw pack, this means that you're taking your product, your fruit or whatnot, and you're putting it in the jar without prior cooking. So the recipe will be very specific as to whether you need to do a raw pack or a hot pack. If both are there, that means both are acceptable. So when you do a raw pack, you put something raw inside your bottle, it'll usually cook down a little bit during the processing time, so you might have a little bit more space in your bottles when it's done. Hot pack means that you're going to prepare the food by either boiling a little bit or doing some kind of pre-treatment to it. This usually makes your food a little bit more pliable. You can usually fit a little bit more inside your jar. So these methods are both acceptable as long as the recipe specifies that they are. Earlier I talked about some things that you cannot put in a bottle, like flour or cornstarch or any kind of thickening agent. However, there is a product out there that is safe to use as a thickening agent to use inside your bottles if there's some kinds of sauces or things that you make that need to be thickened up a little bit, and it's called the clear gel starch. So this starch is available to purchase. You can buy that online, and this is an approved safe product to use in your canning if you need to thicken something. Something else that you need to know is that when you're making things like your pickles or different kinds of let's say chili sauce or things of that sort, and that they call for vinegar, the recipe is going to be very specific on the percentage of acidity in your vinegar that you need to have. So if you have a bottle of vinegar where it doesn't state the percentage of the acidity, don't use it. So My bottle that I have here says 5%. So I know that this is a 5% vinegar. So we're going to start with the most important part is your jars. So I use standard mason jars, glass bottles, and there are different types. So you can buy like a regular mouth that they're called, or you can buy the ones that are like a wide mouth that have a larger opening here and don't have those shoulders on the bottle. I like these jars when it comes to making like jams and jellies. I find that they're really good trying to get out that last little bit of jam. It doesn't have that shoulder where all the jam gets stuck into and you're trying to get the last little bit of it out. These are good, the ones with the shoulders, when you're preserving like vegetables or fruit. They'll stop the, let's say, vegetables from floating to the top and leaving spaces on the bottom. So it's just really a question of preference. They're all fine. Like bottles can be reused over and over again. You don't need to use new bottles every time you can. You just need to make sure that before you use your bottle that you just inspect it to make sure there's no cracks or any chips inside of it. You wouldn't want to go to all that work and have 2 or 3 bottles break during the canning process. So just make sure that they look like they're in good shape. When you look at jars, you have different size jars. So you have these ones that are smaller, so they're 250 milliliter, 1 cup or half pints. And then you have these sizes, they're the same size. They're 500 milliliters, which are 2 cups or pint size. And then you have the 4 cup, 1 liter bottle that is also a quart. So these are the different, the more standard size bottles that you will find in recipes for canning. There's lots of different things out there on sterilization, cleaning of jars, boiling of jars, putting jars in the oven. There's a lot of information out there. One thing I can tell you is that your kitchen is not a sterile environment. Nothing that you're putting inside of your bottles is sterile. So it's very important to thoroughly wash and rinse your bottles in hot water. If you do have a dishwasher, this is one of the best ways to clean your bottles as thoroughly as possible. Do not put them in the oven to sterilize them. You do not need to boil them on your oven for 5-10 minutes to sterilize your jars. Most of the recipes have a processing time of over 10 minutes. It does a pretty good job of getting rid of any impurities that would be in your bottle, and that's why we process them. If ever a recipe calls for less than 10 minutes of processing time, it would be a good idea to boil your bottles, but otherwise a thorough cleaning. And you're going to be putting your bottles as well in your canner to keep them warm while you wait to fill them as well, which is going to give them a little extra cleaning as well. Something else that you may see mentioned in recipes as well when you're filling your jar, so they'll say fill to 1 inch headspace, fill to ½ an inch of headspace, and you're thinking, okay, what is a headspace? So headspace is the space that's going to be left on the top of your bottle once your jar is full. Often during water bath canning, they'll say ½ an inch of headspace, so leave ½ an inch of headspace. So this means once you've filled it with your food and you've put your liquid inside, if it calls for liquid, it will probably bring you to the rim closest to the top of your bottle. So this is about ½ an inch of headspace. So you can take a ruler as well and measure. It's really important to follow the directions on the headspace because this is the air that stays inside of your bottle that's expelled during the processing time, creating the seal. So you don't want to leave too much headspace or not enough headspace to cause your bottle to break. So these next let's say tools that I have, if you want to call them tools, are some of them that I find are nice to have, and some of them I find are almost a necessity. So I like using a funnel to put things inside my bottle. I find it keeps the rims clean, it minimizes the mess. I won't say that I never make a mess with a funnel, but it does seem to kind of minimize the amount of mess that I make, and they're really neat because they fit on the different size jars. So the next tool that I use as well is this, I don't know what you want to call it, a wand or it's a really handy tool. It serves 2 purposes. So when you're canning and you have your bottles filled with your fruits or vegetables or whatever it is you're canning that day, you need to remove, once you've added your liquid, so you need to add liquid inside of your bottle, and then you have to remove the air bubbles. So you use a plastic utensil to kind of go down the sides of your bottle that's filled to remove any kind of air bubble that could be inside. That's really important. And then you readjust the liquid inside your bottle. A lot of recipes that you're going to see out there will say take a spoon and run it along the inside of your bottle, and it's true that it does do the same thing, but it's not recommended to use a spoon or something metallic, because there's a greater risk of damaging your bottles or creating little chips of glass that could fall inside of your bottle, so you wouldn't want to do that. So plastic is the tool that's recommended. What's also handy with this little tool is that the other end is a magnet. So when you're doing canning, you've got your sealing lids that are inside of a pot, let's say on your stove top, keeping warm. So when it's time to place them on top of your jars, they're hot. So the other end serves as a magnet where you can just dip it inside your pot and pick up your cap. So I absolutely love this tool. I wouldn't say it's a must-have, but it's a really nice handy tool to have, and they're fairly inexpensive. So the next tool, this is a jar lifter. I would pretty much say this is a necessity. And the reason why is when you're trying to, when you're doing water bath canning and you have your canner full of water, you need to place your bottles, your filled bottles, inside your canner. Well, you can't drop it in because you risk it tipping over, you risk maybe breaking your bottles, or so you really need to place them in gently, and I can't think of any other way other than using a jar lifter. This works really well. You're going to grab your bottle underneath the rim and pick it up and gently place it inside. It fits with the wide mouth bottles as well. Same thing when you're done processing and you need to remove your jars that are boiling hot from inside your canner. This is a perfect tool for that. And there are kits that you can buy that actually have like these 3 things in a kit for fairly inexpensive. I'll link some of the stuff that I use in the description so you can have a look at what it is that that I've purchased through the years, and the things that I like to use. Other things that I use for equipment, this is just a basic silicone mats that I have spread out. This is kind of like my bottling station, so I spread these out so I can have a place to put my hot bottles and my hot water, and or hot liquid that goes inside the bottle. So, and I have some just cutting boards and just something so I don't destroy the top of my countertop. The type of lid recommended for doing your food preservation, your canning, is the 2-piece lid system. So you have the cap that has this kind of rubber sealing inside, and you have the screw top that kind of fits over it. So these screw caps can be used over and over and over again. So you just inspect them before you use them, make sure they're not getting rusty or nothing, and if they are, just toss them and use some more. But these can be reused over and over again. The caps, this is what actually seals the bottle, it's not recommended to use them again once they've already been on a bottle capped. So when you open your nicely preserved bottle and you remove the seal, don't use these again to process foods a second time. You can keep them if you don't use everything in your bottle and close the bottle up, but you don't reuse them for sealing any kind of bottle. You put a lot of work into preserving this food properly, and you don't want to have 4 or 5 bottles in a batch not sealed because you tried reusing your caps. So they're not expensive. These are the ones that we have here in Canada, and the brand is Bernardin, and there's 12 in a box, and they're maybe like $3 or $4 Canadian. So it's really fairly inexpensive to replace your caps. So if there's something that you want to make sure that work well, is your sealing caps. When preparing your jars, you're going to fill your bottles with the product that you want to can using your funnel. And then once you've filled your bottle, you've added your liquid. If the recipe calls for you to fill it up with a liquid, you need to carefully wipe the rim of your jar. So if you're using even your vegetables, your fruits or jams and jellies, you just have a little bowl beside you with water and a cloth, and you're just going to run that around the rim of your bottle to remove any food particles or sticky sauces that could be on the rim of your bottle that would stop your sealing cap from properly adhering to your bottle. So it's a very important step, and it's often forgotten. And if you've got any kinds of meats or seafood in your bottle, instead of using water to wipe the rim, you're going to use your vinegar. Let's talk about now the most important part. The most important piece of equipment for our canning is actually the canner that we're going to be using to process our jars. So there's lots of different pots that you can purchase out there. Don't feel like you need to go run out and buy an expensive water bath canner to be able to preserve your foods. If you have a pressure canner, you can actually use your pressure canner, but just don't seal your cover. So that's an acceptable pot to use to do water bath canning as well. I, for years, only used this regular pot that I've had here at home. I wasn't able to find a rack that would fit in the bottom, because you should put a rack in the bottom so that the bottles are not in direct contact with the heat of your stove. And this is what I made a rack out of, my caps. So you just twist tie them together to fit in the bottom of your pot. Now, the type of pot that you should have is a flat bottom pot, so that the heat on your stove is in direct contact with the bottom of your pot. If you do have a gas stove, however, you're so lucky. It works so well, and it's not as important that your pot be completely flat on the bottom, but otherwise a flat bottom pot is what works best. So this is actually new. I haven't even used it yet. So for years I've been canning with just a regular pot I have here at home. This I just purchased recently. I found it was fairly inexpensive for the size of the canner. It was $35 Canadian for this. So we'll see how it lasts, but it's really good, and it even came with the rack. I saw this rack looks like it's neat. You can even hook it up on the side of your pot when you're dropping your bottles in. You don't have to go in so deep with your jar lifters. And once your rack is full, of course you would need pot holders. You just need to grab the sides and tuck it in. And when your canning is done and you want to take them out, or you can lift them, and put them there if you need to, or lift all your bottles directly out of the pot. So now that you're ready to start the processing, what you need to do is you need to fill your pot up about halfway with water and place it on your stove top. Put it on somewhere around medium-high heat. You don't want this to boil, just hot enough to keep everything hot. You're going to place your empty jars as well inside your canner to keep them warm. Beside this, you're going to have your pot of hot water with your sealing caps in it, and that needs to stay warm as well. So you need to heat those as well before, but not boil. And you're also going to probably have another pot on your stove with the liquid that's going to be going inside your jar. So that needs to be kept hot as well. So this all depends on what it is that you're making, of what that liquid is going to be. So you're going to be following your recipes, but just make sure that the liquid that's going inside your jar is hot. So you have hot jars, hot caps, hot liquids. Everything stays nice and hot. Now you take your hot bottles from your pot with your jar lifter, because remember, once you've put the water and you put your bottles, your pot's going to be fairly full. So you're going to take your jar lifter, pour the water out. Be careful, don't go too fast because it will go on your hands. So you just carefully pour the water out. Bring your bottle to your bottling station to fill it. So once you've filled your bottle, put your cap on and put the ring, then you return it using your jar lifter and you place it carefully inside the pot. You want to make sure that it doesn't tip over. Be sure not to tip your bottle to the sides because this could cause the liquid inside or the food inside to spill and to go on the rim, and it could prevent it from properly sealing. Once all the food is in your jars and inside your canner, what you're going to be doing next, you want to make sure that you have at least 1 inch of water above the bottles. And this is going to allow for evaporation. If ever the processing time is more than 30 minutes, you may want to add another inch of water on top of this to bring it to 2 inches. So you're going to increase the heat to high on your stove, and you're going to put the cover on top of your pot. You need this to come to a hard boil. Once you've achieved this hard rolling boil, that's when you start timing the processing time based on the recipe. Don't forget to make your altitude adjustments because this is all very important. Once you've put your cover on, you may want to slightly reduce the heat so it just doesn't boil too hard, that you don't have water boiling over. But you have to be really careful when you decrease the heat. You do not want the boiling process to stop. If ever you notice that your pot has stopped boiling, you need to increase the heat again, bring it to a boil, and restart your processing time. Even if it was almost done, you need to restart it from zero. So that's why it's really important to make sure that it keeps boiling really well. If ever you notice during the process that the water level on top of your bottles seems to be going down, and you want to always make sure that the bottles are covered in water, so you could add some boiling water to the pot. Just make sure that it keeps boiling. Once the bottles have boiled for the recommended amount of time, you're going to turn off the heat from your stove, and you're going to remove the cover. Be careful, there's lots of steam, everything is hot, so be careful not to burn yourself. And then you're going to let your bottles sit inside the canner for another 5 minutes before removing them from the canner. Once that 5-minute waiting time is up, you're going to carefully remove your jars from the canner. And now you're going to see that there's going to be water on top of the lid, and it's very important, do not tip the bottle over to remove that water. Your bottles need to stay upright. So you're going to picture your arm as a crane. So you're going to pick up your bottle, you're going to bring it to the place where you're going to leave your bottles untouched for 24 hours, and then you're going to put it down. You're not twisting your bottle around in all sorts of ways. So you pick up your bottle, it's going to still be boiling inside, you're still going to be seeing bubbles. You bring it up, and you bring it across, and you're going to set it down where it's going to stay untouched for 24 hours. And I really shouldn't even have green beans there. It's just that I did them last night and it hasn't been 24 hours, so I can't touch them. But green beans you would never water bath can. That's pressure canned. Once you've removed all your jars from your canner and put them aside, you will probably start to hear them sealing. So it makes a very distinctive pop. And you may even hear that while they're still inside the canner, and that's all good. It's all good. It's a sign that all your bottles are sealing. Once the 24 hours are up, you've left your bottles untouched for 24 hours. Now the first thing you want to do is check for the seal. So you're going to remove the screw cap. Don't leave these on when storing your jars because this could cause a false seal. You always store your jars without these screw caps on top. So you take them off, wash them, you use them for canning your next batch. So you put them aside. Another thing as well is to not stack your jars one on top of the other. This as well could break the seal on your bottles. So you want to make sure that your product is properly sealed. So when you have your cover and it's properly sealed, it kind of sinks in. It's kind of concave, it sinks in. So if you still feel a little indentation on top, that could mean that your bottle is not properly sealed. If you lift your jar a little bit by the cap, it shouldn't just come right off in your hands. When you touch the top of the bottle, you shouldn't be able to press down on it. But if your cap has not properly sealed, you'll hear that popping sound when you touch down on it. It'll make that sound, and that will mean that your bottle hasn't sealed. It doesn't happen too often that you'll have a jar that doesn't seal, but maybe once in a while you'll have one in a batch for whatever reason. The rim wasn't properly cleaned, or maybe there was a little bit of a defect in the cap. If you just have the one bottle, I wouldn't go through the entire step of reprocessing it. I'd just throw a cover on there and put it in the fridge and eat it within the next 2 to 3 days. If ever you would have like quite a few bottles in one batch that didn't seal, you could reprocess them again, starting from zero, putting them in the canner and processing them for the entire time as well. So that's another option. But just make sure that if you do decide to reprocess them, don't use the same cap. Use a new one. It didn't seal the first time, so you don't want to chance it again. 2 more things that you want to do as well before putting your jars away in your pantry or wherever you store them. You want to wipe them down to make sure that there's no residue left over of whatever it is you were processing. Wipe off the tops and all around the bottles. And you also want to write on top of your bottles exactly what's inside, and as well the year that you processed it. You sometimes think, oh my gosh, I won't forget. Unless you only can one specific item, then you probably won't forget. But if you've got lots of things going on in your pantry, your bottle of chutney starts to look like your plum sauce, and your chili sauce starts to look like your salsa, and so just make sure that you write on top so you don't forget, so you don't think you're serving somebody good salsa with taco chips and they're eating chili sauce. I hope you've enjoyed this vlog on the basics of water bath canning. If you did, check out my other vlogs. There is some vlogs that I'm actually making some stuff. You might find something really interesting. If you like the channel, subscribe, like, share. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section. If there's some certain things you'd like to see me do, some things you'd like to see me can, I can give it a try. Feel free to ask questions in French. My first language is French, so I can read French and I can answer you as well back in French. And I hope we talk again soon.